So this is the second part of our book club meeting. And we've decided to start you off with the history talk, because then we can Q&A with everything about the book and the history talk if we have questions. Would you like to take it from here? I'm going to make you a co-host so you can share your screen in a minute.
I've never done the book club, and I've also never done PowerPoint at a book club. So I hope we all sit on Zoom watching PowerPoints all the time now, don't we? But I hope this is going to be hopefully quite an interesting one. We're going to go through what we're going to go through in a second, but quick trigger warnings. So at some point, we are going to talk about sort of history of Sapphism. Obviously, that includes some not very nice criminal records. There is an image of it's a cartoon image, but there is a lady being whipped, and we have some art pornography. I have not censored it, just so you know. But if you are offended by that, please turn off your camera in the art and literature section, and I will hopefully tell you when you can come back. So we're going to skip through. Oh God, I hope we're going to skip through. Here we go. Queerness and Georgian Gardeners, or How I Inadvertently Became a Romance Novelist, because it was 100% not on purpose. Going to go through a little bit of science and knowledge. I'm going to skip through that a bit, looking at a couple of awesome 18th century botanists that this was based on, and then looking at queerness in the 18th century, sort of more generally, and where just the rabbit holes I went down to in that, basically. So what was happening in the 18th century science-wise? So in the basically in the 17th century, so 1600 to 1700, loads of just wild stuff had happened in science. Massive leaps forward in science. People have made all sorts of discoveries. And the 18th century was very much about sort of the popularization of science. So people were really, they were getting to grips with it. The printing press had been invented. Knowledge was becoming much more accessible. And people like Isaac Newton, John Locke, Francis Bacon had really kind of created stuff that people wanted to be a part of. We had Linnaeus, who came up with his binomial system of trying to classify everything, and we'll look at a bit about that. Electricity was a new and big thing. In 1745, they learned how to store it. In 1785, William Withering did come up with the use of the foxglove for treating dropsy, and if anyone is particularly observant, you will notice that it is a little bit earlier in the book. That's one of the only things actually that's inaccurate. Gaslighting, not gaslighting as we think of it now, but gaslighting as in like lighting the streets. At the end of the 18th century, an extinction of vaccination towards the end. So things were really changing, but the 18th century really was about popularization, and people who were not scientists, they were not professionals, often amateurs, but they were really using it to create a kind of identity for themselves. And they did that by going to places like coffee houses. So this is an image of a coffee house where people would go. When I say people, I obviously mean men, because women were not allowed to go there, but they would go, they would have coffee, which was apparently pretty disgusting. They could read the paper, they could chat to each other, and there were some coffee houses that were particularly to talk about science. And what it meant was that for the first time as well, the elite and the gentry could go here, but also the professional class could go here as well, and merchants. And it meant that there was so much more sort of social movement, which was enabled by science and by those conversations, which was very cool. So I was wondering how to structure this talk, and I thought I'm just going to take you on my journey through writing this book, because it was a bit of a wild ride. So my journey started with my PhD and William Constable. So my PhD was basically on this guy, William Constable, who lived at Burton Constable Hall in East Yorkshire. He had one of the best cabinets of curiosity in the country. So a cabinet of curiosity, essentially, there were so many things coming into this country, into Britain, I should say. plants, but also just everything. You read the book, all of those things, and they were just coming in from all over the world, because obviously Britain as a country were not very nice then, and we were just kind of looting things, bringing them all back. And people wanted to order the world. They needed a structure to put stuff in, because they didn't know what any of this stuff was. So they collected stuff, and then they tried to put it in an order. And Mr. Constable did that, and his collection is one of the only ones that exists in this country, in the house that it was originally in. They found it in the attic not so long ago, actually. And he also wrote everything down. He kept all his receipts, so we know a lot about him. And I've spent a huge amount of time with Mr. Constable, and he was a delightful man, which is nice to know. I also think that he was probably queer. This is him just as Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He was obsessed by Rousseau, and I went to track him down in France once, and just turned up without an invite, which was unheard of. But anyway, cool man. And he had all of this stuff. His cabinet is astonishing. He's like tail of an armadillo, some sort of giant lobster claw, tortoise shells. Goodness knows what this is. And this in the middle, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but the bottle that's kind of near the middle, with the red stopper, you might recognize as the skeleton of a dragon, and that you can find the skeleton of a dragon in his accounts. When he bought it as the skeleton of the dragon, and he thought that's what it was, which is kind of cute. So botany then. So botany was popular science. My job in the PhD was to catalogue his herbarium. He had a 10-volume herbarium, which is basically collections of pressed plants. And this was a big thing. So this is the Sloane Herbarium, which is a Natural History Museum. There are over 330 volumes of just pressed plants in there that Sloane had collected from lots of other people. This was a thing that so many people were doing. There were plants came into this country as live plants, but mostly as dried specimens, because we just hadn't really figured out how to bring many plants back successfully. So botany, science was popular, botany was popular science, and the known plant species in Britain doubled within the 18th century, and that order was really important. They were putting them in orders. They were trying to classify them according to all sorts of different authors. You will notice this is the shag-bag nut that turns up at Mr. Constable's. This is his specimen. So botany was also accessible science. So even to women were generally kept out of the scientific sphere. They were kept down because they didn't. They were kind of kept in a state of dependence, really, by being improperly or only slightly educated. A lady being learned was looked upon as a great fault. Hannah More said girls should be taught to give up their opinions betimes, even if they should know themselves to be in the right. It just wasn't okay for you to have an opinion if you're a woman. We've all been this woman, I'm sure. But she was working at a desk, and then like a guy comes in, spreads a bit, likes to tell you what he thinks. So yeah, I mean, botany was something that women could engage in because they did not have access to any scientific equipment. Really, in scientific societies and universities, they were excluded from those. So botany and plants was something that they could do. So how I was then kind of at the end of the PhD, I was in this thing of how do I publish such awesome geekiness, because there were such amazing people in there. Like Mr. Constable is so cool, and the two botanists I'm about to talk about were incredible, and there were so many more brilliant people. I thought I could write an academic book, but it would be dry and it would cost about 140 quid for anyone to buy, and no one will buy it. People will probably read it in a library. I looked at how many people read the average academic paper. It's 10. Like 10 people read the average academic paper. I thought we could probably do better than that. And my job, like my actual job in real life, is trying to educate people on dry subjects in a kind of fun way, I guess. So I thought maybe maybe about it as a novel. And I really can't tell you how much I underestimated that process. Really can't. I thought, yeah, I'll just write a novel of a couple of people wandering around people's collections, and they'll just go and visit, and it'll be nice. And I was about sort of 3 months into that process when my wife went, if you're going to write a book, it probably has to have a plot, love. Like, you're going to have a plot. And I was like, oh, really? Okay. So then I had to, like, a plot is kind of like the things that happen, right? So then you have to decide what kind of things happen, and that's your genre. So I was like, oh, this is like, I should say my wife reads a lot. At this point, I've probably read about 5 fiction books in the previous 15 years. I was not a big reader, and that's an awful thing to admit. So then I thought, well, what people say you should write what you know, right? So I thought, well, I can't really write crime because I don't know anything. I'm not a criminal. I don't live in that world. Mystery, yeah, probably not clever enough for that. Literary fiction, I don't really know what that is. But I know it happens with really good grammar. So then I thought, like, romance. I was like, well, I've fallen in love a bit in my life, and very occasionally people have fallen in love with me. Very occasionally. So maybe I could do that, but like I don't think I've ever read a romance novel at that point. I'd read Tipping the Velvet like when I was at university. I thought, well, maybe we can do that. So I challenged my wife and I said, can you go out and find, because she's better at research than I am, can you go and find an 18th century Sapphic romance? And there was one, but actually it was 19th century, but it was early 90s, which was Olivia Waite's A Lady's Guide to Celestial Mechanics, which if you haven't read, you should read it. And that it was enormous fun. I was like, my wife read it first, and she's like, oh God, there's sex in this. I was like, oh God, is there? I hate sex in books. It's really awful. Anyway, turned out that I could not have been more wrong about any of that. Because like after that, I was like, oh, I probably will only ever read like historical romance. That's like no, but just like anyway. So new world for me as Sapphic romance, and what an awesome world it is! Like what an amazing community this is of readers and reviewers and writers, and everyone is so supportive, and it's kind of changed my life really. It's been brilliant, and here we are. So I decided to publish it as a romance novel because there were these 2 ladies who had really kind of captured my imagination, which I'm going to talk to you about now, and I'm going over time, so I'm going to get on with it. This is Margaret Cavendish Bentinck, who is the Duchess of Portland. She lived from 1715 to 1785, and she was one of the country's richest ladies. She lived between her houses at Bulstrode Hall in Buckinghamshire and Whitehall in London. She came from a learned family and was later a member of the Blue Stockings, and she was married off to the Duke of Portland, and he died relatively young. Good for her. She was also friends with Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who said, who, if we remember, William Constable was obsessed with this guy, and they were dressed the same because William Constable had himself painted in the same outfit as Rousseau. Anyway, so Rousseau said a woman's education must be planned in a relation to a man, to be pleasing in his sight, to win his respect and love, to train him in childhood, to tend him in manhood, to counsel and console, to make his life pleasant and happy. These are the duties of woman for all time, and this is what should be taught while she is young. Doesn't sound enormously fun to me, but he knew the Duchess of Portland, who I like to think is her looking very unimpressed by that. So she had a herbarium, so she started off with botany. She, the very, very little of her herbarium currently survives, but this is one of her paintings as well. She had an incredible garden, which she kept as kind of a botanical garden with different plants out and about. She had flower gardens, she had glass houses, she had all sorts of things at Bulstrode. And she really got into shells. Shells was her really big thing. But she collected everything. And when she died, this is the catalogue of her museum. So when she died, it took them 9 months to catalogue her collection. It took them 38 days to auction it off because there was so much stuff, and it was second. This collection was second only in size to the British Museum. This woman was incredible, but we don't know anything about her really now because Bulstrode Hall has been was demolished in the 19th century, and so there's nowhere to go. There's no kind of place that is representing her, and also she was a woman, so she doesn't get the kudos that other people do. But she is kind of immortalized, I suppose, in certain places. So this is an illustration from a book by George Dionysius Eret, who was an author, not an author, an artist who painted lots of exotic plants of the period. I'm pretty sure she kind of kidnapped him for about 2 years at one point and just made him paint her collections. But you can see here that in this is a ginger plant, and the bit across the middle just say Duchess of Portland, and that's where it was at Bulstrode, and that's where this was growing. She was also the first person in the country to flower a purple magnolia. She was incredible. So she became friends with Rousseau, who had his opinions on women, and by the time they had known each other for a little while, she had kind of really won him round, and he said of her, "You study it with," this is science and botany, "you study it with as much pleasure as success. You follow it in all its realms. None of its productions is foreign to you. You know how to match fossils, minerals, shells, cultivate plants, domesticate birds, and what do you not name? I know one somewhat savage animal who would live with great pleasure in your menagerie, in awaiting the honor of being admitted one day as a mummy in your cabinet collection." He was talking about himself. So he's basically saying, I would like to be a mummy in your collection. I'm sure it was romantic at the time. So the other lady that we have is Mary Delaney. She was born in 1700. She was a little bit older than the Duchess by about 20 years. Funny that. She was born to an aristocratic family who then lost favour when Queen Anne died. So she was married off twice. Firstly, to a man who was 57 when she was 17. Hopefully in search of his fortune, but actually he died relatively when she was 24, I think. But he failed to leave her any of his fortune, which was unfortunate. She was one of the century's sharpest critics of marriage, and she certainly had 2 long-term relationships with women. We obviously don't know quite what sort of relationships they were, but she did do that. And what she did was quite incredible, really. She lived with, well, I should say her second marriage was to a guy called Patrick Delaney. And it is generally said that it was more of a marriage of, it was a comfortable marriage based on companionship and not passion. He he had a friend. They lived in Ireland. He had a friend called Richard Helsham, and they planned their garden together. And he was called Patrick Delaney, and there was Richard Helsham, and they called their garden Hell-Delville together. So they put their names together and called it that. So I kind of like to think that they were having a lovely relationship, and so was the Duchess and Mrs. Delaney. But they planned the garden together, and she made a shell grotto for the Duchess in this garden in Ireland for when the Duchess went to visit, and she dedicated it to her. And then after Patrick Delaney died, and after the Duchess of Portland's husband died, they basically moved in together, and they spent all of their time together. They spent half of the year at Bulstrode Hall living together, and the other half of the year in Whitehall, which is kind of nice. And it was suggested of Mrs. Delaney that it was said she would not be shocked to be introduced to a woman whose relationship with another woman might be seen by some as contravening decorums. I like to contravene a decorum sometimes, don't I? So she was kind of an artist. She was a socialite. She was a big letter writer. But one of her biggest legacies are this herbarium that she created towards the end of her life. And here are some of the pictures. She made these out of paper cuts. So she cut paper out, and this is what these 2 pictures here are made of. There are about 1,000 of them that she created. towards the end of her life, and people say she did it when her eyesight started to fail, but I don't know. When your eyesight starts to fail, you don't put your paintbrush down and pick up a knife, I assume. But here we are. She created these, and if you want to go down a brilliant research rabbit hole, go to the British Museum's website, and all of her paper cuts are on there, and they're just exquisite. They're gorgeous. So please spend some time looking at them. So she said, why must women be driven to the necessity of marrying, a state that should always be a matter of choice? And if a young woman has not fortune sufficient to maintain her in the station she has been bred to, what can she do but marry? And then she went on to call it kind of an irksome prison, and that it should be a mutual choice and a mutual obligation, but it just wasn't. And I think it was so interesting that they'd both been married, they'd both had these kind of not forced marriages, but arranged marriages. But then they found this happiness towards the end of their life, which I think was brilliant. So how do we define an evidence historical queerness? Like we don't know anything about their relationship. They could just have been brilliant buddies. And I think if you are in that world where you are married off to people who you don't particularly like, those female friendships do become really important. So it could have been that, or it might not have been. So we look I am calling it historical queerness because there was not the language to call it anything more specific. So there wasn't language of lesbians, gays, bisexuals, none of that existed. So we generally just tend to call it historical queerness. So general demographics, criminal records are quite big for our evidence, and also literature and art. It was not people writing to one another about their relationships. Generally, no one would commit this to paper. And people didn't write to one another about their heterosexual relationships either. They were not that was not stuff that they were chatting about, really. So just general demographics. In the England and Wales census from 2021, even though there are a few questions over this now in the past week or so, the percentage of people identifying as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or an other sexual orientation is 3.2%, which is kind of lower than I would have thought, but there we are. The percentage of people who said that the gender that they now identify with was different to that assigned at birth is 0.5%, and not from the census, but we know that the percentage of people who are intersex is about 1.7%, and that is the same percentage of people who have ginger hair. So there are lots of people who do not conform to a heteronormative identity or lifestyle, as we know. Also, if you split that LGB group, because trans was separate, down into age groups, that younger age group who are likely to be more open about their sexuality is almost 7%. So if we think that there's not much change in those demographics over time, we can say that it's fine to be saying that there were queer people in the past, and that we can assume that people were queer. And even though we don't see it in the historical record that much, that it was happening and people were acting on it in different ways. So I'm going to go really over time. I'm so sorry. Tell me to shut up. The word lesbian was first recorded and used in the 1730s, but didn't generally become used until the 19th century. They were generally referred to as tribades, ficatrices, or rubsters, all sorts of things with women who loved other women. People knew it happened. They didn't like that it happened. It wasn't really a threat, though, because generally men thought that it was impossible for a woman to achieve any kind of sexual pleasure if she wasn't with a man. So they weren't that worried about it. If it did happen, there was all sorts of investigations, and they would be like, oh no, they've obviously been engaging in terrible sexual activity because their clitoris is now huge, and that's how they manage the penetrative sex and all of this. It's just wild stuff. But generally people were done for fraud rather than women. This is, however, on the continent, so in Britain it wasn't great, but it was okay. On the continent, you could be hanged for sexual relationships with women. Men, if they were convicted of sodomy, they could have the death sentence in Britain or on the continent, because that was considered more serious. So criminal records, quickly. Oh, trigger warning, sorry. So there are some really interesting cases, and I would encourage you to go and look them up if you're interested. But this is Mary Hamilton. So Mary Hamilton was born Mary Hamilton, but she became Charles Hamilton. Started wearing their brother's clothes at the age of 14. Was apprenticed to a physician. Then set themselves up as a quack doctor and travelled around and sold medicine. They married a lady called Mary Price, and they married in 1746. It was 2 months later that Mary Price reported her husband to the authorities in Glastonbury, saying that she'd been duped into believing that this person was a man, and that after 2 months she had found out that he was not a man, even though that they had been engaging in penetrative sex during their marriage. Like, someone wasn't paying attention. But basically, this then did not go well for Charles Hamilton. So he was done for fraud. During the trial, members of his family wrote a letter to the clerk asking for a very severe punishment. They wanted a public humiliation to make sure that he would never again be able to live as a man. And the judge's verdict was that the he or she prisoner at the bar is an uncommon and notorious cheat, and we, the court, do sentence her or him, whichever he or she may be, to be imprisoned for 6 months, and during that time to be whipped in the towns of Taunton, Glastonbury, Wells, and Shepton Mallet. So Mary or Charles was in fact whipped in 4 towns. I didn't go that well. The papers reported actually that Hamilton had married 14 other women before Mary Price, which would have been quite impressive, I think. And Henry Fielding published a pamphlet on this, and it's really interesting that he called it The Female Husband. It gives an account of Hamilton's life about the 14 different wives, and it became quite memorable in literature. And it's one of those things that it probably taught quite a lot of readers and a lot of women that actually it was possible to have this kind of relationship, which probably didn't go quite the way they wanted, but there we go. Another one is Mary East, who became James Howe. So Mrs. Howe, who they married, is unfortunately her name is lost to history, but essentially when they met when they were teenagers, and Mary Howe then decided to come and live as a man, and they ran a pub for 39 years together, with James Howe living as a man, and with his wife, whose name we don't know, and they were cracking. I mean, James Howe became a real pillar of the community. So he was a foreman on juries, he served in parish offices, and he was under consideration for church warden until in 1750, someone who had known him as Mary East decided to blackmail them. So she knew that they were financially comfortable. She decided to blackmail them. They gave her the money the first time until the blackmailer got too greedy. There was a bit of violence, but then James Howe decided to dress again as Mary East, went to court, did this person for blackmail. The entire community came out to support them and to attest to the character of James Howe, which I think is incredible. The blackmailer was convicted, sentenced to stand 3 times in the pillory and 4 years of imprisonment, which is awesome. But the public exposure, unfortunately, they had to give up the pub. He had to resign all his offices. But I mean, 39 years is that's a nice achievement, but it's horrible in the end. Anyway, so usually they were charged with lewdness or fraud if it was found out. But it was really not a public matter that could openly be discussed. The church authorities thought lesbianism was the silent sin. If it was kept out of the public eye, then it wouldn't really occur to women to experiment with it. So art and literature. By art and literature, I really do mean pornography. The word pornography didn't really exist, neither did erotica. They were mainly called mighty lewd books. And there was a book called Mighty Lewd Books. If you are of a sensitive disposition, please do look away now. So it was for men, but there was no reason that women didn't enjoy it too. And the main book that we talk about in Observations is Memoirs of a Woman of Pleasure, which was written by John Cleland in 1747. So basically, he was a guy, he was in prison for, he was in debtor's prison, and he wrote this book, which was mainly about a girl called Fanny Hill, because that kind of joke was still funny in the 18th century, who went to London to seek her fortune, ended up becoming a prostitute, and basically she just had a lot of sex with increasingly well-endowed men. But her first introduction to any kind of sexual relationship was with another woman in the brothel that they were in, and she kind of initiated her. So there's a couple of very common tropes in Georgian pornography to do with lesbians. One is nunneries, so they liked writing about nuns getting it on in nunneries. Another one is sexual initiation of younger women, essentially by other women. And this is what happened in Memoirs of a Woman of Pleasure. But obviously, after that encounter, Fanny was like, "Oh well, that was quite nice, but obviously, I'm never going to do that again. I'm just going to go with the real thing from now on, because that sounds like much more fun." Obviously, it was written by a man for men, so all good. A part of this, it was a very lewd book. It's filthy, actually, but part of it involved sex between two men. And because of that, basically, he was in prison. He wrote it. He came out of prison, published it, and then was put back in prison for publishing it. So not the best. This is another book which was about the sexual initiation of a younger cousin, actually. This is Nicholas Courier, the School for Women, it was called. I don't know, this is the frontispiece for the book. I don't know what's happening here, and no one else seems to either. I don't know if they're actual penises or if it's a dildo shop. There was a dildo shop in Leicester Fields in London. It's a hair though, isn't it? Like, it's not cool. The woman on the right really makes me laugh. He's just having a good think about, yeah, whatever. Anyway, there we go. This happened. It's probably my favorite picture. I think this is a picture by Le Grenet. It's French, and he painted a lot of very lewd pictures, and some included lesbians. I would say that lots of pornography and lots of pictures have very much been destroyed, and lots of artists destroyed them, or they were destroyed over the course of families finding out about them, I guess, because it wasn't a thing you did in the open. But I just love that this is called The Two Friends, because we all do that with our friends, don't we? And I just love how knackered the one on the right looks and how smug the one on the left looks. It's brilliant. I hope it's the right way around on your computer, otherwise it's the other way around. But anyway, they are having a nice evening as friends, I think. Good for them. And then we've got Anne Lister. So before Anne Lister kind of came to light, we had sort of pornography and all of those things, but everyone was like, oh, women didn't actually do it. Like, they didn't know that happened. There's no evidence that they did it, so they must not have done it. And kind of in academic literature, it's referred to as the genital element, whether or not they have sex. I'm like, God, don't call it that. No one's ever having sex if you call it the genital element, are they? But then they found Anne Lister's diaries, in which she'd written in code about the fact that she really did have a lot of sex with women. And I know we've got someone here from the Anne Lister Research Summit tonight, which is very exciting. And I think the diaries of Anne Lister really kind of transformed how people thought about lesbianism in the past, because until then it had kind of been all very polite and there's no evidence for it and all of these things. But actually, then we found out that people were actually doing it and were having a lovely time. So good for them. So basically what happened was it was on this kind of continuum, and I suppose it is now, isn't it? From chaste mutual devotion, where you know that you're kind of in love with someone, but you don't think about it, to this kind of middle ground where there's a lot of angst, I guess, and a lot of hating yourself and hating other people and loving other people, and it being generally horrible. And then not very chaste mutual enjoyment, where people were just having an enormous amount of sex with each other. Good for them. I don't really know anatomically how the picture on the right works, because there seems to be a lot of legs in the wrong places. But that's also from Memoirs of a Woman of Pleasure, actually. So, oh, look, I've got some lines for you as well. So, I suppose, what do we know about these two? Were they lovers or were they not? And I suppose the thing is that we'll never actually know. But Mrs. Delaney did say this of the Duchess. She said, "To her, I owe the spirit of pursuing her art with diligence and pleasure. To her, I owe more than I dare express, but my heart will ever feel with the utmost gratitude, the tenderest affection, the honour and delight I have enjoyed in her most generous stay and delicate friendship for above 40 years. So whatever happened between them, it was obviously just delightful and tender. Personally, I hope they were at it like rabbits, but we're never gonna know, are we? So yeah, it became. I thought, well, I mean, it's such a lovely story, and I'd gone down that rabbit hole, and there's not enough information about these two to create an actual historical fiction book based on their lives. But I hope to take inspiration from it, I guess, for observations, and think about what it could have been like. So the first thought was not to write a romance book, but to kind of represent the lives of the awesome women who did awesome things in science in the 18th century. And I know it kind of makes for a book which is a bit different and not to everyone's taste, but hopefully it is more fun than it would have been had I written an academic paper and 10 people had read it. So far, about 2,000 people have read this, which is way better. And I kind of always think that you never actually learn anything unless you're having fun properly, do you? It's way more fun to learn like that. So that's awesome. And do you know what? Just the support of everyone has been incredible. This community has been astonishing. The amount of people who were so helpful to me when I was putting this together and going to be doing things, the amount of feedback I got from people who were so generous to read it and comment on it, because the first drafts were truly awful. I really can't tell you. It took a very long time to get to where it was publishable. But yeah, I just really am very grateful to everyone in the Sapphic fiction community. It's been a brilliant ride, a wild ride, and I hope that we can really, it helps to shine a bit of a light on these two people because they were just awesome. So thank you. Sorry that went on a bit. I'm 11 minutes over. My apologies.
Yeah, you'll have to answer quick questions.
Yeah.
So as we said before, this is the thank you for the awesome presentation. I liked it. There was some pictures.
Yeah, they're great, aren't
they? So we're going on to the Q&A part of the book club. As I said before, if you want to ask a question, send it to me or to Rach, and we will ask them for you. Are you ready, Sue?
I'm so ready. Yeah.
Okay. Rach.
Yes. Hang on. I have questions written down.
Okay. Do you have one from the people here?
No, I don't. You do that.
I do. Okay, I have one from Evie Bancroft. Do you think it was easier to be queer during Georgian England rather than in England, say, the time of Gentleman Jack?
Good question. So there is about, well, Gentleman Jack was late Georgian, I guess, Regency. But we're talking, I guess, about a 50 or 60 year gap between the book and Gentleman Jack. I don't know. I think it was probably very similar. I think it did get. It was. I think it was actually easier in the Georgian period. Now I'm thinking about it. Sorry. It did get a little bit more once women started getting a little bit above themselves, as they thought of it, and a little bit more confident. It started to become more of a problem. So we often think of the past, I think, as people being really stuffy about sex because we watch a lot of Jane Austen and it feels very stuffy. But actually, and you know, Victorian era was very, very stuffy, Victorian and Edwardian. But actually, the Georgians were just like sex was huge in the Georgian era. Everyone was doing it with everyone else. It was a much more open society than we think of in the past now. So yeah, I suspect it probably was easier than the time of Gentleman Jack, when people had started to get a bit more uppity about women, thinking that they should have, you know, a voice and stuff.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Jess wants to know, what are the blue stockings?
Oh, okay, good question. The blue stockings were it was a group of very learned, not very learned ladies, but they were a group of elite ladies and elite and aristocratic ladies who had basically got bored of just having to sit with drunk men who were talking about stuff all the time, and decided to get together and create a learned society where alcohol was not allowed, gambling was not allowed, but they did things like going around to one another's houses and having speakers and talking about learned subjects, which sounds enormous fun.
Okay. And Jess also wants to know, the Duchess, is she Thea?
Yeah.
See, that's the short answer.
Yeah. Thea is very much based, inspired by her, I would say, not based on her, because I don't know enough about the Duchess's life. But there's definitely a lot of similarities between them. Yeah.
Okay. Rachel, you have a question?
Yeah, and I'd like to know, how has your book been received among your fellow academics?
Oh, good question. I don't know, and I have not asked. I'm really freaked out about anyone I know reading it, but they do, and that everyone that I know who has read it has said that they've enjoyed it, which is great. But I try not to talk to people I know about it too much, because it does freak me out. When I was about to publish it, I think I'd announced it on social media or something, and I went to work, and two people on my way to the office went, "Oh, really looking forward to reading your book." And I got into my office, absolutely panicked, phoned my wife. I was like, I don't think we can do this. People I know are going to read the book. I haven't even considered that might happen. I can't do that. She was like, you know what, you're just going to have to own it and get on with it and stop freaking out. So I did that. Yeah. But I'm still freaked out by it. Yeah.
Anita says, love the book, and I wondered how important it was to you to include the slavery colonialism aspect. So many people shy away from the topic, but I felt it was well handled. And do you use a sensitivity reader, or do you get any external advice?
Good question. Yes, to all of it. It was really interesting for me, actually, because I think it was so important to have it in there, because for anything that we do kind of in my real life, like heritage and stuff like that, you would not think of doing anything, any kind of exhibition or anything like that, without talking about decolonization anymore, and without talking about that aspect of it, because it's such a big part of history, which we've kind of ignored or glossed over, or any of those things. So it's very big, but actually within the publishing world, it's really different. And it was really quite difficult to marry the two. I did have I had an expert on decolonialization. I can never say read it very early on, just to make sure I was on the right lines, and then I had a sensitivity reader read it towards the end. I have to give her a massive shout out to Melina Mackay, who very kindly read this for me, and then zoomed me and was like, holy shit, Sue, what are you doing? Like, this is like, this could go very wrong. I was like, yeah, I know. Thank you. She was incredible, and amazing advice. And it was brilliant to talk that through. And I think I would have liked Skip to have a bigger part, and he should have had a bigger part. And he did have a bigger part when the book was about 180,000 words long. But it had to become smaller, unfortunately. But we haven't seen the last of him or of those issues. So I do think it's important to shine a light on it. It's not comfortable. It's not comfortable in fiction, and I can imagine it's gonna come up again. There's gonna be criticism for it, but that's all right, because we need to talk about it.
And it was part of the times, so you cannot ignore it, right?
You can, because people have ignored it for years and years.
You won't.
But whether you should is another matter. So,
yeah. Okay. Rach, you have another question?
I have one from Jessica. Will Ursula end up with Sam?
Maybe. Maybe not. It was in my head for a while. We'll see.
Interesting. Joanne wants to know, was Constable a character model for Mr. Pickles?
Yes, a bit, actually. Yeah, so William Constable obviously does exist in the book as himself. And he is the only person that one of the only people I felt like I knew enough to put in there. My dog is here, by the way. Very nice. Thanks, Mom. But yes, I didn't really feel like we could explore Mr. Constable's madness enough, so some of him became Mr. Pickles. Yeah.
Okay. Ellen wants to know, what would Thea and Martha's favorite plants or curiosities in their collections be?
Ooh, great question. It's got to be the Venus flytrap, hasn't it? Because that's kind of the thing that sort of holds and brings them together. They were obsessed by plants that moved and plants that did things that was kind of different to normal, because we didn't know then what really the difference was between plants and animals. We didn't really know where plants got where they got their growth capabilities from. We didn't really know that they made their food from the sun. We didn't know how any of that worked. So if you had a plant that was capable of movement of its own accord, especially if it was quick movement, like flytraps or the sensitive plant that closes up on itself, or any of those things, they were obsessed by those and looking at them. So probably those, I would say.
And would that be for Thea as well?
Yeah, have both of them. I mean, Thea's she's not super into botany to begin with. She kind of likes it because Martha does it, but she's more into her fossils and stuff. But she will be getting more excited about botany as we go into book 2.
I'm seeing like, good. And what about the ammonite? Is that how you say it?
Ammonite, yeah.
Ammonite, yeah. That's what I mean. That's on the. That's a big part of the book.
Yeah. I mean, fossils were huge. People did not know what they were, or where they came from, or how old they were, or any of those things. Most people still thought that the Earth was 4,000 years old, because that's what we'd extrapolated from the Bible, and we were just, with the whole kind of scientific thought and with the inductive reasoning of some of the earlier philosophers, we were just starting to think that actually maybe everything wasn't controlled by God constantly, and that actually maybe most people weren't atheists. They might be deists, which was basically a deist kind of thought that God had created the world, and then just sort of left it, and then we could figure out what happened. So that offered a bit more possibility, but still we thought the Earth was quite young. No idea how old it was. So ammonites and geology and stuff was they were very new and intriguing, and we really had no idea what they were. It was very exciting. And Mr. Constable, and I wish one of the I'm going to go on about fossils now, sorry, but I wish one of the things that one of the characters who had to go was Mr. Beltrevis, who is based on a relationship that Mr. Constable had with his basic fossil dealer, basically, who sent him fossils all the time, and was just this mad salesman. He eventually got for embezzling the Royal Society and put in prison. But there's just these brilliant letters between them about all of these crazy fossils and how to go to the coast and how to look for fossils and all of these things. It's very cool. So that's where the ammonite came in. Also because I used to go to Whitby when I was little and search for ammonites on the beach, and that was one of my favorite things to do. So they had to do it as well.
How many do you have yourself?
Do you know what? I don't really have many myself, but my parents have loads of them. I wouldn't even like to count. We just used to, that was my fun when I was little. We used to go with a hammer and a chisel to the beach.
Cool.
So good way of keeping me quiet.
Another question from Ellen. Who would you cast as Thea and Martha in an adaptation?
Good question. So Thea, when I was trying to figure out how to write a book, I did one of those character questionnaire things to try and get to know her a bit better. And Amelia Clark was always the person that I thought probably could be Thea. Martha, I don't know. Like, I really struggled with Martha and who she would be. She could be like Rachel Weisz is kind of my closest, I think. But other people might have different ideas. I'd like to hear them.
Well, put them in the chat. Yay. Rach, I've got one.
I've got another one from Jess. How did you balance the flow of the sex scenes without having the language to name the parts?
Ooh. to name the parts of people, you mean?
To name the parts of people.
Okay, great. That's a good question. Because no one really understood the clitoris then or any of those things, and generally women wouldn't have known what that was, even though they obviously knew it was there. I don't know really. I just sort of wanted it to be more in the style of a book of that time, in which there was just not as much. There was explicit language, but the parts were not really named, I suppose, and the original drafts of the book were a bit more filthy, I have to say, until I turned it down a bit more for the historical fiction audience. So yeah, I don't know really. It just sort of happened like that, I guess. And yeah, I suppose I was a bit freaked out about writing it as well.
Okay, Rach?
Yeah, Anna wants to know, as you wrote about the sexism in scene, how did this impact you as an academic and impact you personally?
What's that? Sorry, the
sexism in the science.
the sexism in the science. I'm just really pleased to live now, and that we can, and that women have kind of the opportunities that they do. I think there's a lot. We can feel sorry for Thea a lot about what they went through and about what women went through. Really, Thea and Martha and Ella and all the rest of them have it very easy because they were very rich, compared to a lot of other women in the period who there is no safety net. Like if you were a woman and you're in the 18th century and you weren't married to a man, you would really struggle to provide for yourself financially. And there was no support from the state. There was nothing. If you were an annoying woman, you would probably be shipped off to the madhouse because you had opinions. It was not a good place to be. So it was really interesting, and I suppose it makes you really reflective about the opportunities that we have, and the opportunities that some people don't have, but also that the whole thing is fluid, and you know the rights of any kind of minority group, particularly LGBTQ, are not a one-way journey, and we have to be very careful to maintain those, I guess, as well, which is something that really yeah, really affected me, I guess. So sexism, yeah, it's annoying, but it's not surprising. And I suppose you do for some of those scenes, it's very easy to draw on experiences that you've had and to make them relatable, because we've all had it, not in as bad as they did, obviously. But yeah, we have all had it.
I have another question from Teresa. Is there any evidence of women managing to sit in and participate in the royal institution or similar?
Oh, good question. And I should probably know the answer better than I do. Yes, the first woman was admitted to the Royal Society, as in to listen to a lecture, I think at the end of the 18th century or early 19th century. But they definitely weren't allowed to speak. I think they first were allowed to speak in the 20th century sometime. It was a very long time. And in the institution I work at, we didn't employ women as gardeners until the 1960s, which is terrible. I shouldn't say that out loud, should I? But yeah, I mean, there was an 18th century professor who was a woman in Italy, but it really was, if you were a woman and you were in a professional sphere, you were either really rich or you had really broken the mold in some way, and you were being allowed to do that by men, obviously.
Let's look at the time, because we're officially out of time. But if anyone wants to, are you good to answer a few more questions?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, sorry, I went
okay.
madly
so
over.
I know if anyone has to have or has to be anywhere else, don't be shy, duck out. The whole recording will be on YouTube. So if you miss anything, then it will be there. Okay. Should we do like 10 minutes or?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I've got 2 messages from Joyce and from Dee asking you, please give us a release date on the second book.
Oh, I really wouldn't like to. I'm about 70,000 words in, so most of it is written, but the journey from the journey of the last book, from it being finished to actually published, was about 2 years, I think, because it was so bad, the first draft, and I had to go through so many revisions. Happily this time I have more idea about how to actually write a book, that it does have to have a plot and things have to happen, and it can't just be completely miserable and all of those things. So I hope it'll be much quicker than that. I'm hoping it'll be this year sometime. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? But we will see.
And we've known from series that they have like different main characters. Will this be about Thea and Martha some more?
It will. Thea will be the main protagonist of book 2 and book 3. We'll basically follow her throughout her life.
There's going to be 3?
There's going to be 3. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, we'll book you for those.
Excellent.
Okay.
I have one.
Yes, go.
Okay, so this is from Menstrella Laura even. You said earlier
who writes the best reviews, by the way. Incredible.
You said earlier that an author should write about what they know. So you wrote about something that is close to your actual work. Will you be continuing to write fiction after this story is over?
Oh, good question. Yeah, I hope so, because I loved it. It's brilliant. It's such an amazing thing amazing experience, amazing thing to do. Yeah, I have to say that there's obviously book 2 and book 3. I have no idea what comes next. We will see. There's so many awesome stories of awesome women to tell in the past, but there's also obviously so much research to do if it's historical. And I kind of spent 10 years researching this subject to this point, and I don't have that background in anything else. So, so we'll see is the answer. But yes, I hope so.
I think Dee is asking the question that we all secretly want to. Would love to read the dirty parts you left out of the book. Please consider releasing them as short stories.
Yeah, I thought it might be popular, and I'm wondering how that might be best to disseminate, let's say. So watch this space, maybe.
As short stories. That could be a good one.
Could be. Yeah, we'll see.
Maybe like a little secret page on your website.
Oh, I like it. Yeah, good idea.
And then we all can get in.
Caroline, you can be my consultant.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
that's good. Rach, you have more?
No, that's it.
Oh, secret code, says Dee. Let's do a handshake.
Oh. Secret code for the dirty bits. I like it.
Okay, I'm thinking about handshakes now in a different way. Anyways, oh, I wanted to know, have you tried the healing waters yourself?
From Scarborough?
Yeah.
No, I haven't. I don't think they exist anymore. I think there was a rockfall at some point in the 19th century, and the spa became kind of defunct. There still is a spa building, but that was more of a Victorian thing. So yeah, I don't think it exists in the same way anymore, which is a shame.
Well, as you
I
described
wouldn't want to risk it. I mean, you wouldn't want to risk that, would you?
I don't know.
Who knows what's going to happen?
As you described it, you can just get a glass, put it in the sea, and go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ugh, that's gross. So I've read somewhere in an interview or that in one of the drafts, Martha and Thea were not supposed to end up together.
No, they weren't at all. Yeah, no, Martha kind of made herself up, really. She was supposed to be kind of a little fling that Thea had after Ella. She didn't turn out that way at all, obviously. So I had to rethink quite hard after that. But yeah, Martha just kind of made herself up. So good for her, I say.
Yeah. Devon says those bathing boxes were fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, that was another research rabbit hole. Bathing machines. Do look it up. There are lots of pictures of bathing machines at Whitby and Scarborough and all of those places where people rode horses on the beach a lot, apparently. But then they were also trekking the bathing machines out into the sea so that people could bathe with modesty. But there are also lots of stories about very dodgy things going on in bathing machines, as you can imagine. There was a couple apparently who were found at it in a bathing machine, and that was quite a big scandal until it was found out that they were actually married to each other. So not the biggest scandal in the end.
It's funny.
Okay. I have more.
Yep.
Jessica said, "What is a stove?"
Oh God, I should probably have explained that better, shouldn't I? A stove house is, this could get very boring and technical, so I'll try not to make it be. But a stove house is like a really early heated glass house. So there's basically a wall, usually just a brick wall, which is hollow and has holes that you can make a fire in. And then the glass kind of comes down at an angle from it, like a kind of lean-to glass house, but really big. And yeah, they're the kind of pipes that go around. So in the early stoves, they didn't have hot water heating systems. They just heated with hot air. So the fires are in the walls. They went up the hollow walls, so they warmed that wall. So you had a very warm wall, and they also went around the pipes that went around the stove. But that made for a really dry environment. And with the fact that we also couldn't bring back anything that was too fleshy because they went on very long voyages and they didn't survive well, there were just basically a lot of plants that do well in arid environments, like pineapples were very common, and there weren't a lot of like super fleshy plants, I guess. But then sort of later in the 19th century, 18th century and into the 19th century, we learned how to do hot water heating with hot water, which made the area much more humid and much better for growing plants from tropical climates. So that's the different types of stove, I guess, as they developed over time. Gosh, that was boring. I'm so sorry. That's what you're at a book club for, isn't it? The technology of historical glasshouse is brilliant.
It's good. Rach, you have one more?
I don't have any from anyone else, but I have a question.
Should we do 2 more then?
Yeah, have you got questions? Have you got questions from other people?
Not anymore, but I have some.
Okay. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, well, let's say there are a lot of emotions in the book. What was it like to write those? Were you going up and down into depression and coming right out again?
Yeah, actually, it's really it does really affect you, I guess, when you're writing it. It was really interesting to think about how I would have reacted to stuff, I suppose, and how things would have affected me. I think because it was my first book and I really didn't know how to do that, thinking about how I would have reacted to things is probably the best way I could think to represent that. So it was quite personal, I guess, a lot of the time. And things like, I suppose, Martha's story towards the end about her previous relationship and things like that, that was quite harrowing to think that that kind of thing probably did happen really quite a lot of the time. But also at the time, you probably don't know if you follow me on Twitter, we're renovating a house because I go on about it a lot. And we were living in a caravan at the time. And during most of it, we were doing all sorts of ridiculous things like planning the foul drainage systems and all of those things. So generally, just like in the middle of a very emotional scene, I would have someone knocking on the window going, I don't know what the fall on this pipe's got to be. So then I had to go and sort that out and then come back to it. So it was quite nice. They were often just, yeah, it wasn't very immersive a lot of the time. So I suppose that was a good way of dealing with it, really. But yeah, I think, and you have to bring a bit of joy to it as well, because not everything was miserable all the time. So that was important, I think, to get some humor in there as well.
Sure. I've got one from Ellen. Rach, do you have one more?
Yeah, no, go on.
Okay. How much do you write every day?
Oh, great question. That really depends. So it took me a long time to plan book 2. I've probably been planning that for 4 months or something like that, because I learnt in book 1 that planning after the fact, after you've written a lot of it, is really annoying because you're going to go back and change a lot of things, move things around, things then don't make any sense. And I hated that. That was awful. Even though I had, for book 1, I had 50 spreadsheet tabs of planning and information and all of those things. It still was awful. So book 2, I decided to plan in a much more rigorous manner. So actually, by the time I finished planning it, writing it has been much more smooth, I guess. So I'm kind of aiming for an average of about 2,000 words a day. So sometimes it's 500, sometimes it's just dipped over 7,000 once. But yeah, I have to squeeze it in the mornings and the evenings a lot of the time. I've had about a 5-day break at the minute because it got a bit much. So but yeah, I'll be back with that and hopefully enjoying it after a while. Yeah,
I would say so, with a house renovation and a regular job.
Yeah, you've got to fit it in. The first one happened in lockdown, when there was just so much more time back in life because no one was traveling anywhere. But yeah, you've got to fit it in, haven't you? You'll find time.
Yeah, that's true. I have one last. Should we do just one more? Just because? Okay. Dee wants to know who creates the book cover. They are beautiful.
Thank you. The first rule of, I think, creating book covers is don't create your own book cover. But I did decide to do that. I think the one that we ended up with was about draft 694 or something like that. The first ones were truly terrible. can't tell you. I was like, no, I know what I'm going to do. I know what I want to look like, and it was just awful. It went, there were lots of different options, and my wife is my harshest critic on that, and it was basically always like, no, that looks terrible. It also looks like a horror novel. Stop it. So we eventually ended up with something that was relatively simple, but yeah, hopefully all right. So,
Well,
yeah,
it's gorgeous, and it's nominated, right?
yeah, I know. I'm so excited, but I mean, there is just some incredible book covers nominated for that. I would not vote for mine, so.
Well, maybe we would.
Okay, great, thank you. But
Okay.
there are better ones.
Okay, people, thank you for being here and listening and asking questions and answering, of course, too.
Thank you.
Thank you all. I hope you had a great time. Are we happy? Have a good day, have a good evening, have a good night, wherever you are in the world.
Bye-bye.
And hope we'll see you in 2 weeks, April 29th.